Hi, I'm Shan Wu with the Under Color of Law hot take on a postponement today in the Manhattan DA's case against Donald Trump. Judge Juan Merchan, the trial judge, was supposed to give a ruling about whether the Supreme Court's immunity decision applies to Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg's conviction against Donald Trump. The question there was going to be whether or not the fact that the High Court granted immunity to presidents for an overly broad interpretation of what are their official acts, whether that could somehow undercut the Manhattan DA's conviction against Trump. Just to remind everybody, that's a lousy argument for Trump, because what he did there was clearly not an official act. It happened before he was president, trying to cover up evidence of his sexual encounter with the adult actress Stormy Daniels, and claiming that if that had come out, if that information about Ms. Daniels and him had come out, that would hurt him, and that's why he wanted to pay her the money to be quiet. The issue is not that it's illegal to pay anyone for non-disclosure or for silence. The issue was how that would have affected the election and how they falsified the business records. That's what he got convicted of. Before he's president, hard to understand how it could be official anyway, but at his trial, his defense tried to plant some seeds there, saying, some of the actions, perhaps to cover up, involved him discussing things while he was the president, looking back at that. So that very narrow amount of activity that would have involved him when he was president, that is the tiny little nexus that his attorneys are trying to hang the immunity issue on. They want to take the Supreme Court's really lousy ruling about immunity to make that fit into this tiny amount of actions that happened when Trump was president and make that completely make him immune against the entire state prosecution brought by Bragg. That's a very weak argument. Nonetheless, it is an argument and has to be heard and decided. So Merchan, though, has now postponed his ruling on that. Now, I think that the ruling would have been quite favorable to the district attorney, because that small slice of action, whether official or not, even if you removed it from the case, let's pretend he's immunized for anything he talked about or did about this cover-up policy in the White House, that would still leave intact the bulk of the evidence against him. So it really should not cause a dismissal of the case. Nevertheless, there is a postponement today, and we'll put up that postponement for you. Both the district attorney as well as Trump's team decided to seek the postponement. They agreed to it. And so Merchan has delayed any further action until November 19th, and he did that in an order. So what does this mean for the case, whether Trump will be sentenced or not? The main point Trump's attorneys made was that they want consideration of Trump now having been elected. That's their main reason for postponing it. You would think that both the judge and the DA knew that this was a possibility and that it shouldn't affect what they're doing because he's not president yet. We'll talk about that in a second. You see from the excerpt that the Trump attorney wrote that he wants to argue that going forward with the sentencing would infringe upon Trump's ability to govern. Okay, let's explain why that's really nonsense when you think about it. So first of all, they're trying to bootstrap the idea that he's immune as a president or a former president for stuff he did as a president. Again, this was really 99% not actions he took while he was president and 100% not official acts in my view. But they want to bootstrap that into the fact that he's president-elect, and therefore the whole case should either go away because he's immune, or at the very least, you can't sentence him because he's going to become the president. The way to get at this, because this is a state case, not a federal case, is through the Supremacy Clause. In the federal case, let's just remind ourselves of that. Jack Smith's cases are dead because Trump is the head of the executive. He's, in that sense, head of the DOJ, and he can simply tell the DOJ these cases are to be dismissed. Also, DOJ has a Office of Legal Counsel, which has a policy for DOJ. They won't prosecute a sitting president. Soon Trump will be a sitting president. So no matter what, those cases will get paused for a long time and Trump can dismiss them. But this is not a federal case. It's a state case. The only way they can get at it is to try and argue that through the Supremacy Clause, that what applies on the federal level somehow applies on the state level. That really is not going to legally work because it doesn't make sense. So with regard to the OLC memo that DOJ can't prosecute a sitting president, first of all, this is of course not DOJ. Second of all, he's not a sitting president right now. He's a president-elect. So at the stage the case is at, which is simply deciding if immunity applies, and then the next step would be sentencing, there's nothing, even if this was a federal case, to stop them from going forward. Now, there are some folks, including some judges, former judges, have indicated that it's really impossible to imagine a jail sentence being handed down here. That's really wrong to me, too. There's no reason why, right now in this posture, Trump can't be sentenced to jail. Just because he's president-elect should not affect that if we really believe in the rule of law, that people are all the same, should be treated the same way. Now, if he becomes president, which he will, then there's obviously a problem if he has a jail sentence during that time. But, you know, it's sort of a logistics problem, really. I mean, it's a political problem in that no one can imagine having a president serving some kind of jail sentence at all. That's a political problem. It's not a legal problem. There's nothing that stops it from happening legally. Yeah, there are logistics. How would he serve the sentence? Can he run things from jail? He needs protection. Well, don't mean to be facetious, but he can have plenty of protection in jail. He can have the Secret Service there. And you know something? People run criminal enterprises out of jails all the time. So that's really just a logistic. The fact is, if Merchan were to sentence him to jail, that jail term would not take effect when Trump assumes the presidency. It's kind of impractical. So it would be stayed. I mean, that's something Merchan could do, is sentence him to some term of incarceration, but that sentence is put off. It's stayed until the end of Trump's presidential term. That's something he could do. I think he should treat Trump just like any other defendant. Trump has gotten so many favors because of his status and prestige, and the fact that he's been reelected president should not be a further example of that. Now, what Trump and his team really want to do here is to make this case an example of how the whole concept of federalism just won't apply anymore, that he as the executive rules everything right down to the state and just keep invoking the Supremacy Clause for that. It's wrong legally, and it's certainly wrong morally. I mean, the states need to stand up. The state judges need to stand up. The state DAs need to stand up, as have Alvin Bragg and Fani Willis in Georgia. In this coming period, it kind of looks like the states may end up being the champions, certain states, for the rule of law. A little bit of a reversal from those of us who study history from the civil rights era, when really it was the federal government that had to come in to push for justice in light of the states being very anti-civil rights in those days, anti-justice. But history is history because it comes in ebbs and it comes in cycles. But the flow for our country can be in the right direction if the structure, the Constitution, and our efforts to uphold it remain strong and it's a sound structure, then it will allow these sorts of changes. It may be that for the next few years, the real force of justice is at the state level, as we've seen here, because the feds were not able to bring any of these cases to fruition. And maybe at a certain point, it'll change again. But that's okay. What's not okay is if we hurt the structure, if we don't follow the structure that exists, if we don't follow the rule of law. So hopefully, that's what's going to happen in Manhattan. All right, thanks for listening. Good to talk to you. Keep those replies and comments coming. It's really nice to hear that, and it's very helpful. Make sure you subscribe to our channel. This is a new day for media, and we really are hoping to talk with you more often. Thanks.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories at the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.